Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Voices, a library lecture series. We'd like to begin with an acknowledgement that we are gathered in the sacred homelands of the Mohican people, who are the stewards of this land. Today, the community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Nation. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors past and present. Voices presents speakers on timely and enduring issues each semester to broaden and enrich the scope of studies at Hudson Valley Community College. Please fill out that survey so that we can plan for future. This week we're celebrating the National Week of the Young Child, and brochures about that event are up in the lobby. After the event, students can receive certificates of participation if we didn't catch you on the way in, as well as a ticket for a door prize. Today, we are very pleased to welcome Michael Saccocio. Mike is Executive Director and CEO of the City Mission of Schenectady. The purpose of City Mission of Schenectady is to establish and maintain programs and ministries that address the physical, social, and spiritual needs of the poor, as well as those who are under-resourced. Based on his 33 years of experience working with homeless and underserved men, women, and children, Mike will be talking with us today about moving from poverty to sustainability, building lives, leaders, and communities. Please welcome Mike to Hudson Valley.
Thank you, Liz. All right, thank you. Well, it's great to be here. Always enjoy coming out to Hudson Valley, so thank you so much for being part of this series. And I'll go back and start with a story that goes even before my 30 years at City Mission, when I got a job as the deputy mayor of the city of Schenectady. It kind of came out of nowhere. This was big news. I was on top of the world. I was 30 years old, deputy mayor, had this big office in City Hall, and that euphoria lasted for about 2 days. Because I suddenly realized that I was way in over my head. I didn't have any of this experience. I was now overseeing a $50 million a year budget, police department, fire, public works, finance, all the labor contracts, and I had no experience in this. So I realized that the only thing I could do was try to build relationships with the experts, and if I knew them well enough and trusted them enough, then I could do my job as a leader. So I decided that I would spend time in every department of the city. So it actually got a big story in the paper because it was a unique way to go about the job, and some of the assignments were very enjoyable, like the city has its own golf course. So I was glad to do that one. Get out there, make sure the golf course was being maintained. My best day, though, was the fire department. Really cool to go up to the top of a 70-foot hook and ladder. So that was a fun day. Well, one day, a man came in my office named Carl Olson. And Carl was the director of solid waste. That was actually his title. And he came in, he said, you're visiting all these departments, but you haven't been to the waste transfer facility yet. And I'm saying, no, I haven't. He said, you need to come and spend a day down there. So, okay. So I go down to Weaver Street where all the city's garbage comes and gets transferred into tractor trailers. And folks, the moment I got out of the door, I knew where I was. Okay, definitely they're moving garbage here. So Carl takes me in his office, and it was a big office, and it had these windows, and the windows were looking out into the pit where they dumped the garbage. And he was so proud of that view. And he said to me, what do you see when you look in those pits? I said, garbage? He goes, do you really? He goes, you know what I see? I see my wife's dream house. I see my daughter's college education. I see the sports car that I always wanted to buy. He says, you need to understand, I grew up in a family that ran a garbage business, so every good thing I got in life, I got because of garbage. And until you stop seeing that as garbage and start seeing it as opportunity, you will never help solve this city's solid waste problems. Now, even in that moment, I said, that is a profound life lesson. It's a lesson about the truth that adversity always creates opportunities. And it's true in all of our lives, because for all the differences that we have, what we all have in common is we've got things in our lives that we wish weren't there, that we would like to just get rid of, but they linger. Sometimes we can move past them. Other times they stay with us. And a key to life is not necessarily getting rid of something, but can I discover the opportunity that even this challenge brings me? Okay? And Carl taught me that. Little did I know I'd be spending my whole career at a place like City Mission, right? We're a homeless shelter. So honestly, folks, it's really all adversity. People only come to us because everything's gone wrong. No one sets out. There's no graduate of Hudson Valley who's saying, my life goals, I want to go live in a shelter. Right? So people only come because they're broken and they're kind of beaten down by life. And as important as it is to provide shelter for the homeless or feed the hungry or clothing for those who are cold, those things are important. But, if that's all we could do, I could not dedicate 30 years there. The reason why I get excited about going to work is because there are opportunities even in that difficult place. And our job is to not only help people get through their crisis, but help them begin to see the possibilities of their giftedness and of their strengths. And that's really what the mission's about and what I want to talk about today. An example of that, a man named Joe came to the mission several years ago. He had just spent over 20 years in prison. So when he got to us, he had no high hopes. I mean, what was he ever going to do? That kind of prison record. He just needed a place to stay. But as Joe got to spend time at the mission, he began to meet other people with similar stories, maybe not quite as extreme, but similar. And he noticed that many of them were living new lives and had new lives of purpose. So Joe began to believe, maybe for me. He joined our one-year program. He graduated from it. He got a part-time job at the mission. He did so well in that part-time job, he got a full-time job. Well, a while ago, while Joe was on duty, there was a bit of a rumble in one of our bathrooms at the mission, and a staff member came by and said, something's going on in the bathroom. And so Joe and two other guys went up there, and locked in a stall was a man who was overdosing on a heroin injection. And this man was dying in the stall. Joe figured out what was happening. He somehow got himself up over that stall. He got in there with that man. He took the needle out of the man's arm. He had brought Narcan with him, and Narcan is an opioid overdose treatment. He administered it. The man thrashed back to life. Joe held him tight until the paramedics could arrive. And the man's life was saved. When I heard about this, I went to see Joe, and I said, hey, Joe, you're a lifesaver. He smiled at me and said, well, Mike, that's what you trained me for. Now, what could account for such a difference? The biggest thing is not that his past could go away, but he had discovered a purpose for life, a purpose that didn't have to hide what his past was, but could actually, in an amazing way, build upon it and use it as an asset for what he wants to do. Jim Collins is a business writer. He wrote a seminal work called Good to Great, and he tries to study the marks of great leadership. And he says one characteristic of great leaders, they have what he called the Stockdale paradox. And I won't get into why he called it that, but here's what it means. That a great leader is a man or woman who is willing to look at the facts, the brutal facts, no matter how hard they are. This leader doesn't want to put on rose-colored glasses, doesn't want wishful thinking, wants to know what are the facts. But in knowing the facts, the leader also has an unshakable resolve that we will prevail in the end, and we will achieve our goals. And so what are the facts that we have to deal with when we're talking about people coming out of generational poverty? And maybe City Mission is generational poverty in an extreme form, right? The fact that there is homelessness. In the Schenectady School District this year, over 300 students are listed as homeless. Okay, at the mission last night, we had about 100 homeless men, women, and children. On the men's side, more men than beds. We had to put mats down on the floor to fit everybody in. We're serving over 600 meals a day. We learned that children often didn't have access to food on the weekends, so we're part of the weekend backpack program, providing over 900 bags of food every weekend of the school year for elementary school children in Schenectady. Right? There's issues of addiction. And the brutal nature of addiction and what it does to people and families and communities. Right? There's mental health, and mental health was always severe, but I think with COVID and the closing down of different resources, it's really severe right now, and it's kind of overflowing into the streets. right? There's the injustice that's so prevalent in under-resourced communities, and injustice takes on a host of things, right? It can be anything from racism to sexism to all the different things that we try to struggle with when we're amongst unjust systems and situations. There's the fact that everybody who comes to the mission's in trauma. I mean, there's a test, and maybe the early childhood people are familiar with the ACEs test. It's a test for adverse childhood experiences. There's 10 questions, and if you've had 3 or 4 of those, you are experiencing some form of trauma. Most of the women who come into our shelter check all 10 boxes. And so the children, of course, are carrying that same trauma, and these things really undermine education, because learning's hard to begin with. But if the world around you is constantly in an upheaval and you're in a state of your own trauma, trying to study and grow in that is very, very difficult, right? Life expectancy, health. 3 years ago, the Times-Union ran an article on the Sunday Times-Union, and it compared life expectancies in the capital region. And so I was focusing on Schenectady County. And in Schenectady County, the highest life expectancy is Niskayuna. It's 87, which is wonderful, right? I hope they can get it up to 90. So Niskayuna is 87, and the lowest is Hamilton Hill, where the mission is located, and that's 66. Now, that's staggering, because that's 21 years difference in life expectancies in communities that are 2 miles apart. Doesn't that even sound hard to imagine? How can people's life expectancies be different by 20 years if they literally live in communities that almost border each other? But that is the reality, and that's what we're trying to deal with. There may be perhaps the most debilitating result of all this is a pervasive sense of fatalism that develops amongst people that generationally are always in a state of crisis. And what happens when your life is constant crisis over the course of many years, you become very fatalistic about the future. In fact, you really stop thinking about the future, and you just get into the fight to survive that takes all the energy and strength you have. And you also come to a conclusion that it really doesn't matter what choices I make, because there's no way out of the situation I'm in. And I've talked about this before when I've been at Hudson Valley. Grasp how important it is that if you do not believe that the choices you make today will affect where you are tomorrow, you can't go anywhere. Right? You have no incentive for education. Every one of you as a student, you are willing to make short-term sacrifices for a long-term gain. Right? On this nice spring afternoon, you're actually listening to me. Right? Not because, there's this wonderful speaker coming, but you want that education because you're men and women with a dream. And this education is a vital part of seeing that dream fulfilled, right? But if you don't believe the future can change, there is no incentive for education. There's no incentive to take an entry-level job and work your way up to building a career. And there's certainly no incentive to health care. Is that me, Mark? Did I change that? Were you pointing at me? Okay, all right. So there's no incentive to health care because the nature of good health care is to be preventative. Okay, it's again making short-term sacrifices. It's not eating that food. It's not drinking that drink. It's not smoking that cigarette. Not because you don't feel like it. In fact, you may have a strong urge to, but you're thinking long-term. It's the reason why smoking cessation problems are so ineffective in a place like under-resourced communities, because when they tell you not to smoke, they're telling you that there's a price to pay 20 years down the road. And they're trying to market it to people that don't know if they're going to get through tomorrow. Right? And that cigarette helps them cope and get through their struggles, right? Doesn't mean we shouldn't try to help people stop smoking. It just means the marketing is not sensitive to the reality of where people are coming from. So what can we do? What's the action? Because I certainly didn't come here just to make you feel bad about the struggles of under-resourced communities, although hopefully I can make you think about that and maybe want to learn more and do something. I think the first thing that we try to do, that I've tried to dedicate my leadership to, is helping people gain a new sense of purpose. Right? That there's a reason for what I've been through. and there's a reason for what I'm working on, and there's a place that I am going, what we call a future story. Okay? So it's important to help people with life essentials like housing and food so you can get them out of that crisis so they begin to have enough stability to start really imagining what could life be. And one of the great news for a place like City Mission or for people who have struggled through so much adversity is that adversity can really be transformed into an asset. Right? That those struggles, those things people wish they never had to experience, don't have to be something you try to hide behind you and hope nobody finds out, but it can be something that you build upon and realize this experience, as difficult as it has been, gives me a new capacity, a new resilience, something very important to bring into the marketplace. Right? And that changes things. The folks at the Mission have a wonderful expression. They say, my mess has become my message. Right? So I don't have to be ashamed of my mess. As I fix it up, as I make it stronger, I've got a story to tell. So at a place like the Mission, it's a game changer. Right? We have almost 40 of our employees are men and women that came to the Mission from off the streets. So you can imagine how valuable they are. Tonight, when a woman comes off the street into our shelter, she's going to be greeted by a woman who's been there. A woman who can look her in the eye and say, I know what this feels like. I know the fear and the pain and the shame. But don't you give up, because here's my story. And if it can happen for me, it can happen for you as well. Right? There's one guy that, again, came to the Mission from out of prison. Great heart for young people, and he helps deliver our weekend backpacks to Martin Luther King School in Schenectady. And one day, he began to ask the principal and the social workers, do the kids need any clothes? And the social worker said, yeah, actually they do. It's wintertime. They need coats. They need boots. So Anthony said, we got a lot of clothes at the Mission. I'll take care of them. And every week they would give him a list. And Anthony would go to the warehouse. In addition to bringing about 130 bags of food, he would bring the clothing items. And it became so popular that the school took a classroom and converted it into a clothing room. They called it the Unique Boutique. And it's this powerful place where kids' lives are impacted. And now we have 10 clothing rooms in Schenectady schools, from elementary, middle school to high school. But I asked Anthony one time, Anthony, what made you ask about whether the kids needed clothes? He paused and said, when I was a boy, we had to put cardboard in our shoes because we had holes in our shoes and we couldn't get new shoes. And that always embarrassed me. And I never had a good coat in the winter. I was always cold. And I don't want these kids to go through that. So we begin to imagine not that it was good that was his experience, but to see how he took that adversity, and instead of just making it something to stick in the back of his mind, he has a heart. I could have given to that school 1,000 times and never thought about whether those kids needed clothes. Because not that my childhood was easy, but I certainly didn't have to get cardboard in my shoes when I got holes in them, and I never went a winter without a good coat. Okay? Part of that possibility that people have. There's a young girl that lives in our women's and children's shelter. She's 10 years old, and she moved in a few months ago with her grandmother. And so she volunteers every night when she comes home from school to serve the community meal at City Mission. I asked why she does that. She says, because I know what it's like to be hungry. And so every night after school, she goes to that dining center and serves other people. Now, we all wish she never had a hungry day. But do you think that young lady is building something powerful? Do you think she could be a transformational leader in our community? That knowledge of what it's like to be hungry will make her unlike other people that have never felt that pain or never had that fear of knowing where the next meal is going to come from. As I said before, City Mission, we have nearly 40 employees that are former residents, and they demonstrate the power of purpose. There was a great French writer of the early 1900s. He was an aviator and a writer. His name was Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Now that's bad French, so bear with me. but he had an amazing quote, and this is what he said. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to gather wood, divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast, endless sea. What that means that if people are yearning for the sea, no one will have to tell them to gather wood, because they know the only way to explore that vast, endless sea is to build a boat. So they'll do it on their own. I think that's what we try to do at City Mission, not simply tell people what to do, because that really doesn't go anywhere beyond the day. It's to get them to yearn for what life could be and how their life experience can be transformative, not only in their lives, but in the lives of others, to identify the fact that your challenges make you a unique type of leader that this community desperately needs, and we will pour every resource we have into helping you become that transformational leader for yourself, your family, and your community. You know, when COVID hit, right, 3 years ago, the government tried to figure out how to deal with that, and so a lot of places closed. Obviously, as a shelter, a City Mission, we declared we're never going to close. And we said we won't close for 1 hour, we won't close for one meal, so we had to stay open. At the same time, if you remember, the government was structuring programs for people who weren't working. And the way it worked out was that you could make, in many jobs, you could make more money not working than working. And so these nearly 40 men and women had the opportunity to stay home and make more money than if they were coming to the mission. So I'm thinking, my gosh, we're going to have anybody left to run this place? And you know, they all chose to come to work for less money and at great risk, because they were working in a congregate setting amongst high-risk people in the midst of a pandemic. Why would they do that? Because they have purpose. Because they're grateful for the help they received. And they realized this was their moment to stand strong, to give back, and to take their life experience and be a different type of leader in a time of crisis. I learned a lesson watching them that people who are used to crisis often do very well in a crisis. I was watching other very successful people fall apart, come apart at the seams, because they had never dealt with anything like this. And my folks at the mission, honestly, they didn't blink. And many of them said, well, this is challenging, but at least I'm not using, right? I'm free. Oh, no, I can do this. I remember going person to person asking folks if they were going to keep on working. And one man named Kermit, who's a great leader at the mission, he said, Mike, when I had no place to go, this mission took me in. And so I will stand here with you till the last brick falls. Right? That's that strength, that resiliency that so many people who are now kind of being discounted in marginalized communities could offer us and other communities as well. I want to say this before I kind of dive into some other points. The one thing I don't want to do is make it sound like it's smooth or easy. Okay? We do not have a magic formula. City's a mission that you lose more than you win. That's the reality of City Mission. You cry more than you laugh. You have more setbacks than advances. But when those advances come, when those laughter comes, when those victories come, they are life-changing victories. And they are worth it all. That's why I can tell you after 34 years, I've never been more excited about my job or the opportunity I have to go there every day and try to make some history with the folks that we serve. Transitioning, I want to say, to really make a difference, though, we have to understand what's going on. And one thing that I learned probably about 10 years ago from a group called Bridges Out of Poverty is that there's actually 4 basic causes of generational poverty. And a lot of people don't think like that. People will point to one cause, but as usually the case, life's more complex than that. And the 4 causes that they identify for generational poverty, number 1, not in any order, but behaviors of the individual. Number 2, lack of human and social capital in a community. If you ever heard the phrase a food desert, right? The fact that under-resourced communities don't have access to grocery stores or healthier living opportunities. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, exploitation, I've learned this lesson: wherever people are suffering, somebody will set up a business to take advantage of it. And so there's a lot of that going on where people pay huge money to have their checks cashed, and there's payday lenders, and it's a lot of exploitation going on. And the fourth one is economic and political systems that actually undermine the purpose for which they were served. If you do this work at all, you hear of something called the cliff effect. And what that means, when someone who's on public assistance gets a job and starts building resources, that rather than being rewarded or encouraged for that building, they lose their benefits, like immediately. So rather than people being able to advance by virtue of their hard work, they actually go backwards. I've had people at the mission say, do I have to take that raise? Because if I take it, I'm going to have less, I'm going to lose more than I gain. Right? So the systems are off. So we have to address all four of those. Why I think this has happened is we live in a highly politicized world, right? We know that. There's like red and blue. And folks who operate more out of the red approach, they think there's this cause, right? More behavior of the individual. Folks coming more of a blue perspective say, no, it's more about exploitation or lack of capital. So the red and the blue argue. And what I learned, what we really need to solve these problems, is a whole lot of purple. Okay, that if it's all red, that's inadequate. If it's all blue, that's inadequate. And this really helped me, because when I first came to the mission, I was a guy that thought it's pretty much the behavior of the individual. And that's what I thought was the reason for poverty. And when people said it was other stuff, I'm like, you know, they're just barking up the wrong tree. I can't work with them because they're not focusing on what really matters. And when I realized there were four causes, I then realized, wow, okay, it's fine if I want to focus on behavior of the individual, but I need to be partners with somebody who's passionate about exploitation, somebody who's passionate about lack of human and social capital in the community. I need all four of those causes represented by people I trust and work with, because my piece is only one piece. I want to be part of a movement where all the pieces come together. One of my closest friends is a man that literally came of age in the civil rights movement of the 60s. And he has a very different view of reality than I do, right? But I need to hear him. We meet for coffee like once a month. And I just need to hear what he has to say. I don't always necessarily agree with it, but I desperately need to hear it. And my approach to my job is so much more comprehensive and impactful, because his experience pours into what I do, and hopefully then I can pour what I know into what he does. Okay? The other thing we have to do is we have to get excited about building win-win partnerships. See, one of the downsides when a community becomes so polarized the way we are, where people on different sides can't even eat lunch together anymore. There's a lot of negative facts to that, but one of the biggest is we have become blind to win-win opportunities that are right in our midst, right? Where we can all win. We stop thinking everything becomes win-lose. And I'll give you two win-win opportunities that are right there for us. One is the fact is between business and the social sector and education, because businesses desperately need employees. Okay? Almost every business person I talk to says, I need more people. I need more good people, right? And yet, nearly everybody I work with needs good jobs. Now, that's a partnership, but yet we still stay on different sides, right? That's when we should rally together and say we all win. If men, women, and young people can get excited about work and education and a career, we should go all in on that. And just for a moment, put aside the argument. Another really great win-win is in healthcare. And that sounds like one that really would be one against the other. But here's the win-win. What doctors desperately need, what our healthcare system desperately needs, what is literally breaking the healthcare system right now, is they need people, particularly people coming out of crisis living, out of generational poverty, to engage in preventative healthcare. Right? Why don't they? Because their life is in crisis. But preventative healthcare is about the only way to make our healthcare system financially viable. Right? But think about it. A lot of folks I work with, there's nothing as crazy as going to the doctor when you feel good. right? That doesn't make any sense. But we know if you want to be healthy, that's what you do, so that you can catch things early, that you stay ahead of your health situations and not lagging behind. But a lot of folks who are under-resourced kind of use the emergency room as the doctor's office. And so they wait for something to get so bad they can't take it anymore. And now it's a major thing instead of something smaller that could have been settled. So we have great opportunities to come together, but we need leaders who can get above the arguments and take away that there are win-win opportunities for people. So is that just wishful thinking, or can it happen? Well, I'm here to tell you, absolutely can happen. I'll tell you one of my favorite stories, and this is something I always shared when I came to the childhood classes. So City Mission is in downtown Schenectady. Anybody ever been to Proctor's? Okay, so you know Proctor's is on State Street, and if you go out Proctor's back door and you look to the left, you will see our women's and children's shelter. Now, if they were starting from scratch, that's probably not the way they would have built it. Okay, because as downtown was revitalizing, as Proctor's was up and running, right, as new restaurants were coming in, as apartments were being offered for professional young men and women professionals, all these good things were happening. There was a collision going on, because what usually happens in a downtown that's kind of a dead downtown is the social sector moves in. Okay, why? Because the rent's cheap and it's on a bus line. So as new restaurants and businesses were emerging, they might be right next to a mental health treatment center or a drug and alcohol center. And all these arguments were developing because someone's saying, customers don't want to come to me because there's people smoking out at the sidewalk, or there's some woman talking to herself all day, and people don't want to come into my store, right? And people could very well say, and why do we have a 100-bed homeless shelter right in the middle of a business district? So I knew that lawsuits were starting. They were trying to drive organizations out. I said, okay, City Mission, they're coming for us. Maybe not yet, but they're coming. So one day I walked over to Philip Morris, who is the executive director of Proctor's. I said, Philip, how can City Mission help Proctor's be more successful? And I waited because I thought he was going to say move, right? But he didn't. Philip's guy with a big heart, he goes, you know, there is something. He said, we got all these new people coming to Proctor's, and they don't know where they are. They don't think downtown's safe. It is, but they're nervous. They park in this big garage. It's dark, it's cold, and they like run into the theater. He goes, I wish we had people that could go out there and greet them and make them feel welcome. And I heard that, and I said, I really don't want to do that. But that's the offer. So I said, all right, Philip, the next 3 months, this was like end of September, from October through December, every night there's a show at Proctor's. City Mission residents and staff, we will go out and we will greet your customers. And we called ourselves the ambassadors. We got red coats and flashlights. And at first we just said hi to people. But one thing I love about my folks is they're very entrepreneurial. They said, we can do better than this. So they started getting people to parking, they're guiding people across the streets, they're holding doors for people, and then we made a major capital investment. We bought umbrellas. And let me tell you, you meet someone at their car when it's raining out and they want to go to a show and you walk them in with an umbrella, you have made a friend for life. So the program was really going well. The last month, December, the play Wicked was doing 30 shows at Proctor's. So Metroplex, which is the Economic Development Center, commissioned a survey. What do people like? What don't they like, right? Because they knew they were going to have about 60,000 people coming down. When the survey came back, folks, this is true, the ambassadors scored higher than the play. People liked the greeters more than Wicked. Now, this blew away the leaders, and I actually got a call after that survey saying, if we start paying your people, will you continue to do this? I'm like, absolutely. So we built this full-time program with, it was jobs for our graduates with Proctor's. Then I got a call from one of the business leaders saying, Mike, I got a problem with you. How come Proctor's gets all the ambassadors? You know, our businesses need them too. We need greeters too. I go, well, Proctor's pays for them. Then we'll start raising money. And so the top business people started holding fundraisers so that City Mission graduates could go and work with their businesses. So I used to like to say, now it's spread to Albany, but when it started, downtown Schenectady was the only downtown America where the business people were paying the homeless to stand in front of their businesses and greet their customers. But what was happening is it wasn't just that people were good at holding doors. What people were realizing is the men and women of City Mission, because of their adverse experiences, had a different ability. Yeah, they could smile and welcome people, but when street stuff would happen, as it sometimes does, they were so cool with it. They knew what to do. They didn't come undone. They had been panhandlers. One night, a man passed out on a cold winter's night from drinking. And the ambassadors, after the show, carried him to the mission. And when we complimented them and thanked them for going the extra mile, their response was, "But I was that man. And when I was down and out, people didn't leave me. They brought me to a place where I could get help." And so that has grown. Talked about Philip after the play Hamilton. We just finished a 2-week run, but the first time it was there, he sent me an email. Now, keep in context, this is the theater, okay, writing to the homeless shelter. In almost any city, that's a battle. Here's what he writes. "I love the ambassadors. It has been my delight to watch them, to call them to duty, and to hear our audience's appreciativeness. Thank you to the mission and to each ambassador. A huge part of making Schenectady look great and be great." And so, folks, the possibilities, we start taking down these walls that divide people, and we start putting people side by side, and we realize that everybody has something to receive and everybody has something to give. And people whose life experiences are very different are not disqualified for leadership and opportunities to make big contributions. In many ways, they're holding the secret experience that nobody else has, and they can solve problems that haven't been solved up till now. And I'll give you an example. I got a call just a few months ago from the business district saying there's been an increase in panhandlers in Schenectady. That's not all bad because it means that there's money down there. I mean, we don't like panhandling, but panhandlers only go where there's money, so it shows Schenectady's rebounding. But they said to us, the only ones who can win this battle are the ambassadors. I got a call from the police department saying, "We know we have a job to do, but the ambassadors can do things that we can't do." And so we started something called Ambassadors 2.0. And we got a van, and we would go out each night looking for people that were panhandling and see if we get them into treatment, get them help, build trust, get to know them. Let them know that although that activity is really not allowed there, but they matter. That we believe in them. It's not simply a get lost. It's like, can we get you some help? Right? And the reason why it can sometimes work, not all the time, is that the men and women who are selling it have all been there. I went out one night with a guy named Eddie, and he had this great rapport with a guy whose girlfriend was panhandling on the streets, and they became friends because their bunks were next to each other at Schenectady County Jail. Okay? So obviously Eddie had a credibility that no social worker could really have. Right? So this program has been going so well, I got another email from the woman who runs mental health services for Schenectady County. So she's a high-ranking official, and she's writing about this man named Eddie. Eddie came to the mission out of jail, out of drug court, on the streets, and came into our program. And this is what she writes. I want to send you an email. I want to email you to let you know how amazing Eddie is and how grateful we are for his services. As you know, we started the actual field work yesterday for the hub. Eddie was able to provide so many updates and let us know some individuals we really should be targeting. Furthermore, he has built such a great relationship with these folks that without him, I do not know how successful we would be. He is truly such a great asset to the mission, and his passion for the work is admirable. I am honored to be able to work side by side with him through this new program. So folks, I can tell you with all honesty, if we can create a situation, a community where high-level leaders are considering it an honor to work with men and women who have lived very different lives, but being very important skills. Men and women filled with a new purpose, a new future story, a growing love for their community and desire to make a difference in it, a desire to go to men and women who have lost hope because they've stood in those shoes, and to send the message that hope is possible. If we can keep on doing that, we can really change our communities. So my word to you today, and we wrap up, and maybe there's a couple minutes for questions, is it's harder than you could imagine, but it's far more exciting than you can imagine. So I hope this has been an opportunity to expand your perspective, to expand your paradigm in your own lives, that your own adverse experiences really can be something that you convert into an asset that makes you a unique type of leader or employee or family member or friend. Secondly, to never count people out, to go to the margins, not simply to help people in their pain, but to help them transform that pain into a powerful form of leadership that would really make them leaders in our communities. So thank you so much for listening. We have a couple minutes. Maybe there's a few questions. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Justin Hurley.
Hi, Justin.
News editor with the Hudsonian.
Oh, great.
I have a little bit of experience working, not particularly. I'm part of an organization that works with a free store over in Albany.
Okay.
Handing out, groceries, stuff.
Okay,
like
great.
that.
Yeah.
Something I've realized that one of the biggest, and you hit a lot of it, especially with the socioeconomic problems that we, of course, socioeconomic problems that we face. I mean, you're talking about a lot of even laws and other things that were written to keep people down.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
talk about redlining and stuff.
Right.
My question is something that I've noticed is the biggest problem I've seen is the lack of empathy and more apathy toward the people who are struggling with that.
Yeah.
I think it's more of a social, cultural problem.
Good insight.
I'm realizing it.
Yeah.
What would you say to those people? Because
Yeah.
that's amazing that I work for Schenectady, but a lot of places they
Yeah.
have for example, what's it called, the homeless aggressive, the
Yeah.
anti-homeless
Right.
stuff, so they
Yeah.
can sleep on the ground. So
Yeah.
what would you say to get people, be able to talk out and call out those type of people who are against that type of work?
Justin's making a great point that when there's a lack of empathy, it's going to be much harder to bridge these. And I think my answer to that, Justin, is we have to create vehicles to get people side by side with each other. One of the things I love most about the mission is that we don't receive any government funds, so it's all private funded. So donors will come down to volunteer. And that's great because we need their help. But what almost always happens is these men, women, or young people say, wow, I got a lot more out of it than I gave. I needed this. Because they begin, I did a retreat this weekend up at Lake George. And it was a pretty, I would say, middle to upper class church invited me to come and be a speaker, but they invited 7 men from the mission to come. And just by being together for the weekend, being in small groups together, eating together, these leaders of this church said, these guys made this retreat. You see, just I think what we have to do is we got to strip it down from theory. Some of these walls are paper walls. They're only strong in theory. If we can get people together and actually get to know each other, they're going to realize, number one, how much they have in common, and that their differences are actually attractive. Right? It's like harmony and music. We just built at the mission a cafe. We built like our own Starbucks. And one of the reasons why we built it, I just want people hanging out together. I want successful young people, maybe they're making a lot of money. I want them at the mission, not just serving meals. I want them to meet our folks. Right? I want people to share stories and realize, I think it's really, if I were to say one word, Justin, that I think is needed, mutuality. That it's not just givers and receivers. It's not winners and losers. We all need to receive. We all can give. We all lose. We all win. Mutuality recognizes that we need each other and that we are truly stronger when we let the differences not keep us apart. I think so much could happen, folks, if we just found places to gather, get out of the echo chamber and gather together. So there would be some messiness to it, but there is messiness anytime we gather, right? But it would be so worth it. So thank you for that insightful question. And that's my heart's desire to build it back. From the grassroots, I think, is more than what can happen top down. Thank you. Yes?
You mentioned that you got an email from the police
Yeah.
department and you started working sort
Yeah.
or that sort of thing. Have you seen that?
I have.
Or is it just, okay.
Yeah, I love your description of community care, and that hub model that the mental health director was talking about is actually, it's a group of people that meets every 2 weeks. There is a police officer on it, but it's mental health people, it's social sector, it's shelter directors, and it's also men and women who have graduated, who have that life experience. They're in the hub as well. And it's going out as a team trying to help the people that are most marginalized. But the big takeaway is that it's everybody realizing no one person or group or organization can do it. The police really do have a role to play, but if they're playing the lead role, it's probably going to go sideways. Okay? But that doesn't mean they can't be on the team. So I think it really is a celebration, and it builds on what I said to Justin. When you get to know people, you start identifying giftedness, right? And then you start identifying plans where everybody brings their gifts to the table. So I like your phrase of community care, because I think all the solutions are going to be community solutions. So thank you for that question. Yeah. Anybody? These are great questions. Anybody else? Okay. Justin? Yeah, Justin will wrap us up because we got just time for one more question. Because I wasn't going to let anybody go, Justin, so.
You brought up the police, and
Yeah.
I know that, especially since 2020 when we had the whole George Floyd
Yeah.
thing, there's a lot, I mean, personally, I have a lot of problems with the criminal justice system.
Okay.
But I know a lot of the people, especially the people who you work with,
Mhm.
have had really bad history
Yeah.
or bad experiences. How do you get people that you may know or may have connection to, like in your life, to actually start trusting you
Yeah.
and trying to get help again?
Right. And so you captured the key word, which is trust, right? And you can't get trust back in one encounter. So I think it's really committing to a journey together. And obviously for police officers, they have to bring the humility to say, I want to listen to. And we're seeing more and more of them. That really, I would say, I'm not saying I know them perfectly, they really want to be part of a solution. And so I think you always start with the circle of the willing. And you start building that trust, and as trust builds, then people are willing to start taking some risks with each other. So I think what I said at the beginning, that Stockdale paradox, what are the brutal facts? Let's not try to make it sound better than it is. Let's not put on rose-colored glasses. In some places, the division is brutally deep. But the only way to build it back is to put people face to face, get people in a learning mode, and then getting people working together, and then being okay when it gets messy, because the goal is worth it. So thank you, Justin. Thank you all for listening to me. You're all very kind. I appreciate it.